Keir Starmer just publicly committed to bringing Angela Rayner back into his cabinet, describing her as hugely talented and suggesting that misogyny played a role in the criticism she faced. This is the same Angela Rayner who resigned in disgrace just 3 months ago over a £40,000 stamp duty underpayment. But before we proceed, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more updates on this channel. Thank you. The same Angela Rayner who breached the ministerial code and was forced to quit as Deputy Prime Minister, Housing Secretary, and Deputy Labour Leader. And now Starmer saying, yeah, she'll be back. It's political rehabilitation at lightning speed. And honestly, it's absolutely fascinating. I'm your host at UK Political Insight, where we cover British political chaos multiple times a day, because frankly, the content just writes itself at this point. Today, we're diving into Starmer's remarkable commitment to resurrect Angela Rayner's career, complete with suggestions that criticism of her was driven by misogyny rather than, the whole breaching ministerial code thing. It's a masterclass in political loyalty meeting terrible optics, and the fallout is going to be spectacular. Let's start with what actually happened to Angela Rayner, because the timeline here is crucial. Back in August, reports emerged that she'd underpaid stamp duty by approximately £40,000 on an £800,000 seafront flat she'd bought in Hove. That's not a minor accounting error. That's a massive underpayment on a very expensive property. The stamp duty on an £800,000 property is substantial, and somehow she managed to get it wrong to the tune of 40 grand. Rayner self-referred the matter to Sir Laurie Magnus, the Prime Minister's independent ethics advisor, which sounds responsible until you realize she probably self-referred because she knew the story was about to explode and wanted to control the narrative. Magnus concluded on September 5th that she had breached the ministerial code by failing to seek adequate specialist advice on her tax obligations. That's ethics advisor speak for you cocked up and didn't bother getting proper advice before doing something that required proper advice. She resigned on the spot, losing 3 massive positions simultaneously: Deputy Prime Minister, Housing Secretary, and Deputy Labour Leader. That's not just a cabinet position. That's the second most powerful person in the government. And she lost it all because she couldn't be bothered to get proper advice on a massive property purchase. The resignation letter was full of regret and taking responsibility, as these things always are. Starmer responded with a handwritten note about how sad he was and how she was a trailblazer for working-class backgrounds, which was nice, but didn't change the fact she'd breached the ministerial code. That was September. It's now December, 3 months later, and Starmer's already promising she'll be back in cabinet because she's hugely talented. The rehabilitation tour is happening at absolutely breakneck speed. Most politicians who resign in disgrace get at least a year or 2 of penance on the backbenches before anyone talks about bringing them back. Rayner's apparently getting 3 months. It's political fast-tracking that would make express delivery services jealous. Starmer's comments to The Observer are remarkable for their unequivocal support. He said he missed Rayner, called her the best social mobility story this country has ever seen, and when explicitly asked if she'd be back in cabinet, simply said, yes, she's hugely talented. No caveats, no maybe in the future, just yes. That's a clear commitment that she'll return to government, presumably once enough time has passed that it doesn't look completely ridiculous. But then Starmer added something that's going to dominate the conversation, probably more than the comeback itself. He suggested that misogyny had played a part in the level of criticism both Rayner and Rachel Reeves have received in recent months. Now, on one level, he's not wrong that female politicians often face gendered criticism and scrutiny that male colleagues don't. That's demonstrably true and worth calling out. But in this specific context, suggesting that criticism of Rayner's £40,000 stamp duty underpayment was driven by misogyny is quite the stretch. She breached the ministerial code. That's not a gendered observation, that's a factual finding by an independent ethics advisor. She underpaid a massive amount of tax on a luxury property. That's not misogyny, that's a legitimate scandal. Plenty of male politicians would face identical or worse criticism for the same behavior. In fact, male politicians had resigned for less. So while there may be misogynistic elements in some criticism of female politicians, using that to deflect from legitimate scandals is intellectually dishonest and politically counterproductive. Kemi made this exact point during Prime Minister's questions last month, arguing that if Rayner returns to cabinet, she must pay back the £40,000 of property taxes she avoided. Which is a fair point. You can't breach ministerial code over tax underpayment and then just waltz back into government without addressing the underlying issue. Has Rayner paid that money? Has she sorted out her tax affairs? These are legitimate questions that need answers before any comeback discussion. But here's where the plot thickens even further. Earlier this week, a source close to Rayner said she will not be played like a pawn after reports of a deal between her and Health Secretary Wes Streeting to run for the Labour leadership. The Daily Telegraph reported that Streeting's allies were pressing Rayner to sign up to a joint ticket for the top job, with presumably one of them as leader and the other as deputy. The source insisted there is no vacancy and there is no pact, but the fact these conversations are happening tells you everything about internal labor dynamics right now. People are already positioning for a post-Starmer leadership contest, and Starmer's only been in office 6 months. That's not normal. That's a sign of a government in serious trouble, with ambitious politicians already looking past the current leadership to future opportunities. Rayner and Streeting are apparently the two names being floated most seriously, which makes sense because Rayner has the deputy leader position and working-class credentials, while Streeting has media competence and hasn't resigned in disgrace recently. Starmer's response to all this speculation was to insist he has no intention of stepping aside before the next election. He gave this whole speech about how everyone said he couldn't change the Labour Party, but he did. Everyone said he couldn't win an election, but he got a landslide. And now people say he can't change the country, but he'll prove them wrong. It's meant to sound defiant and determined, but it actually sounds quite defensive. The fact he feels the need to insist he's staying on suggests the pressure and speculation is real enough to require addressing. Angela Rayner's backstory is genuinely impressive and worth acknowledging. Born in Angela Bowen in 1980 in Stockport, she grew up on a council aid in challenging circumstances. She left school at 16 without qualifications to care for her mother with autoimmune issues. She trained as a care worker and became a prominent trade unionist with Unison before entering politics. That's a remarkable trajectory from care worker to deputy prime minister, and it represents exactly the kind of social mobility story that should be celebrated. She was elected MP for Ashton-under-Lyne in 2015 and rose quickly through Labour ranks. Shadow Education Secretary, Shadow Equalities Minister, and then elected Deputy Leader in 2020 under Starmer. After the July 2024 election, she became Deputy Prime Minister and Housing Secretary with a brief focus on social housing and local governance reform. These are significant achievements from someone who started with every advantage you can imagine. And that's what makes the stamp duty scandal so frustrating. She'd overcome incredible obstacles to reach the top of British politics, representing a background that's massively underrepresented in government. And then she underpaid £40,000 in stamp duty through not bothering to get proper advice. It's such an unforced error, such a preventable mistake. You're the housing secretary, for crying out loud. You know property taxes are complex. Get specialist advice. It's not complicated. The optics of a housing secretary underpaying stamp duty on a luxury seafront flat are absolutely terrible. You're supposed to be overseeing housing policy, representing renters and people struggling with housing costs, and you're buying £800,000 flats in Hove and getting the taxes wrong. It plays into every negative stereotype about politicians being out of touch with normal people's concerns. Even if it was a genuine mistake rather than deliberate avoidance, the perception is disastrous. Starmer bringing her back so quickly risks reinforcing the impression that there are no real consequences for ministerial failures. She breached the code, resigned, and 3 months later she's being promised a cabinet return. What's the lesson there? That if you're close enough to the prime minister, you can cock up and be back in government before anyone's really noticed you were gone? That's not accountability, that's a revolving door for favored politicians. The misogyny angle is particularly problematic because it conflates legitimate criticism with sexism. Yes, female politicians face gendered attacks that male colleagues don't. Yes, there's often a double standard in how their appearance, tone, or personal life is scrutinized. All of that is true and worth calling out. But Rayner didn't resign because of misogyny. She resigned because she breached the ministerial code. Framing criticism of that as sexist is a deflection that undermines legitimate conversations about gender bias in politics. There's also a practical question about what cabinet position Rayner would return to. She can't be deputy prime minister again, at least not immediately. That position was filled when she resigned, and there's now presumably a deputy leadership contest happening or completed. Housing secretary seems unlikely given the stamp duty scandal involved housing. So what's left? Some other cabinet position that's significant enough to justify the hugely talented description, but not so prominent that it looks like she's just being rewarded for failure? The timing of this announcement is also curious. Why is Starmer making this commitment now? Is it because Rayner's camp has been agitating for a return? Is it to shore up support from the left wing of the party that Rayner represents? Is it because he genuinely values her contribution and wants to signal that her career isn't over? Or is it because he needs loyal allies?